Good morning and welcome to Scotland Speaks at our usual time of 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Over the past couple of weeks, you've had the opportunity to look at the memorial that we held in Alex's name in Linlithgow, a stone's thrown away from where he was born and grew up. And we're very grateful to all the ALBA party members who attended and gave their own personal stories about their memories of Alex. Let's take a look at just a few.
His internal optimism, not just for elections, not just for the progress of our party, but also for people, was something that I don't think I'll ever forget. So thankfully we stood in those by-elections, we got great results, and Alex was absolutely beaming. He was absolutely convinced and determined that in 2026 we were going to deliver a breakthrough, not just for our party, but for our country. And it's that internal optimism, friends, that we have to make sure that we grasp. We have to take that forward into 2026.
And he lit up every room that he went into. And I miss that. As Jeremy Corbyn said, we'll miss him down here in Westminster because he smiled to everyone and he spoke to people and he cared for people.
There was a guy, it was a block of flats, and I chapped the door, I think it was the second story. An old guy opened the window. I must admit, he's probably the same age as I am now, because it was a few years ago. Anyway, he was shaking his fist out the window and using expletives, which obviously I'm not going to use just now. And he was telling there's no chance he was ever going to vote SNP. Once again, Alex saved my bacon. He came up the path and he started talking to the guy. Within 2 minutes, the guy was saying, well, I might vote SNP. Within 4 minutes, he was definitely going to vote SNP. So if you've ever been in the sharp end of politics, i.e. chapping doors, you need someone like Alex Salmond to protect your back. The man was fantastic on the doorstep.
I was so happy when ALBA Party was born because Alex Salmond had that vision that Scotland must be a country, not a county. So please keep doing, and please, it's important for Scotland, but it's important for us too, that Scotland become independent someday.
And thank you very much indeed for all the messages you've sent in. Donald says, a great man and a patriot, will miss him greatly. James says, brings a tear to my eyes. Great show as always, keep up the good work and may he rest in eternal peace. Diane says, what a tragic loss for Scotland, the loss of this great man. Rest in peace, Alex. David says, a great man, sorely missed. OU says, gone but not forgotten. His legacy of the bridge and renewable energy will not be overlooked either. Sky Blue says, thanks for posting, a great man. Gail says, Scotland's greatest leader, sorely missed. Will nae see her like again, boss. Sayer Alba. SN for RFS says, excellent video. Thanks so much for sharing it. Eleanor said, that was so moving. It breaks my heart Alex isn't here anymore. But let's finish the job of delivering independence, because the spirit lives on in every one of us who wants to see our wee country regain liberation. R.I.P. it, we won't let you down. Paula says, fine tribute, the dream shall never die. And finally, Kizzywiz says, I've been waiting to see this, thank you. I leafleted for Kenny in Paulbeth, West Calder in the late 70s, early 80s, with a baby in a pram and a 5-year-old helper. I remember where Alex first came to my attention, when he and Kenny left the SNP as a 79 group, and have followed him and Kenny ever since. It still hurts so much to lose him, and how sad it is for Scotland, but I'm so glad I was able to meet him at ALPA conferences. A great wee video. Alex would have loved it. Thank you so much, Kizzy. Now after the break, we're going to meet a man with many stories about the wonderful Alex Salmond, and that is Angus Brendan MacNeil. We'll see you then. Welcome to Scotland Speaks, Angus. Now, of course, this
Thank
isn't
you.
not the first time you've been on this programme. You've had the pleasure and privilege of being interviewed by Alex on the show previously, but that was from Barra, and we had the opportunity to have you in the studio. But let's speak about Alex before anything else. You spent a lot of time with Alex over the years. You're campaigning in the SNP. I think your first candidacy, he was probably up and around to help you about. Tell us a bit about your life and times with Alex.
I suppose it started, goodness, 25 years ago now, which makes it kind of shocking just to say that, but it's around the 2001 election. So I was candidate for a good year and a bit before that. And it was at the 99 conference. Yeah, it must have been the 99 conference. Kind of got to know Alec first and Moira as well. And then as the 2001 election was approaching, I was standing in Inverness East near Lochaber. And it was the number one target seat for the SNP. So it's quite a bit of, I suppose, mild pressure, if you like.
And was it a contest for the candidacy in the good old days of the SNP?
Yeah, there was. We just got Fergus Ewing elected at the 99 election, been sort of the perennial in the SNP in the Highlands for quite a while. Now there's a vacancy, who's going to be the candidate, because SNP also seemed to look to Fergus Ewing. That's probably not true, but it's the way I felt. And happily Fergus was elected, and then there was myself and a man called Stuart Dixon. We went forward and I was selected. In fact, I was asked to come and join the SNP because I started writing letters to the I think it was the Glasgow Herald at the time, saying that Gordon Brown had said Scotland could never be independent. He'd come north and there'd be new government, whatever. It was about November 1998 or October. And I pointed out in the newspaper that while Gordon Brown was talking Scotland down, Continental had just closed a tyre plant outside Livingston for one in Cork in Ireland, independent Ireland. And when you look at the map of the UK, Cork hardly seems to be in the centre of tyre consumption or use of the British Isles, but that didn't really matter because the Irish government could so structure things and incentivise things that they put jobs into Cork, and we lost jobs in Scotland. And it's been ever thus, and been that for quite a number of years and decades. And the SNP in Lochaber wrote to me, a lady called Helen Dewar, God rest her, and she asked me if I'd go to a meeting. And I thought I didn't particularly want to go to a meeting, and a fellow called John McInnes, who did work with Fergus Ewing, John told me, go along, stop sitting on your hands, people like you should be involved. You seem to have ideas, but you seem to shirk away from meetings. And he was right. But luckily, I kind of thought the meeting would be just a solid agreement that we wanted an independent Scotland, and I thought I'd be pretty bored about that. But kind of debates involved, and it was interesting. So that moved on. Helen Dewar was particularly behind me becoming a candidate. She said you'd be good. I didn't think I'd be good. She said you'll be good, Angus. All right, okay. So we went forward.
And what campaign support did you get from Alex then? How did you get involved in that campaign? What did you bring to it?
Well, it's been the number one target seat. Alec came up. He was John Swinney, I think, was leader. Alec was going around certain areas, seeing what the strengths and weaknesses were. I'm not sure what he thought.
Of John Swinney or Scotland or the SNP? Or?
Of the particular candidate. I'm sure the weakness list was longer than the strength list. But anyway, he came along and was greatly encouraging, and he was a huge figure at that time. He hadn't held any government position, but just by sheer strength of who he was, Alec Salmond was known. And I think I boldly said to Alec one time that I knew Sean Connery was floating about. And I said, if you can get me Sean Connery on the trail here, I'll win the seat, Alec. And within a few weeks, he'd Sean Connery up for me. And, again, this was a guy who hadn't held any major political office, but had a drive, had an ability that people could see, and could get the likes of Sean Connery coming along to help the likes of me on a campaign trail. So it was vote Angus for a day, vote Angus.
And it all went down very well. And then, of course, you didn't win that seat time round.
I lost, but luckily the attention went off.
With all the help with Alex and Sean.
He did point that out to me several times. I even brought Sean along. And but we lost a seat in Galloway as well. So in a way, Schadenfreude you think, phew, the attention's not on me at all, the attention's somewhere else. So the SNP went down from 6 to 5 seats at that election. I think turnout was quite down. Tony Blair just held on to his majority quite comfortably. It was a nothing of an election in many ways. And that's the way it went, and probably then I'd moved back to the islands in the intervening period between 2001 and 2005.
And then 2005, of course, saw you elected to the House of Commons, where you joined Alex. What was that like?
It was it was good. I mean, the campaign was quite interesting in the islands. He flew into Barra, landed on the beach, joined me. No, actually he didn't. He was meant to land on the beach, and he had to go to the plane was diverted to Benbecula, and he's coming over the Sound of Barra on the ferry, and we could tell the ferry was having fairly erratic movements. And Alex Salmond had managed to talk himself up from the car deck to steering the ferry. And we could tell there was something not quite right in the ferry. He did claim he was trying to make an SNP symbol in the sea.
Oh, I see. His captainship wasn't particularly...
And again, this is a guy who hadn't held any political office, but he was well known by the force of his character and what have you. He was on that. And then we did go to the airport. He got his lunch in the airport. We went to Castle Bay. I was reminded by a guy, Neil McLean, the other week. He said that when he met Alec, he couldn't shake his hands because he'd been fixing a car and he had some of his groceries or something. He'd sausages and something else on his hand, and Alex said to him, "So it's stewed sausages tonight, Neil. I know you can." and Neil can clearly remember that. Yeah. And then we had a big long journey. It was 150 miles, a couple of days, and Alec was everywhere meeting everybody, pressing the flesh. Everybody was delighted to meet him. So you were dealing with a bit of a superstar then. That's few people are superstars before they hold high political office. And Alec really was very well known, and people wanted to meet him and to talk to him because he had a purpose.
And when you went down to Westminster, did he give you, as he did to us, and we'll come to that in 2015, the tour, the explanation of how things work?
Yes, always look at the order paper, look for opportunities. Read Erskine May. He told everybody that. I think the only person who ever did read Erskine May was Alec. And I think we had a look in Erskine May and we thought, my goodness, it's a tome about so thick. It's drier than the average tax directory. But Alec was full of that. He was full of encouragement. And the other thing, at weekends, he would phone you with ideas. Now, I just thought he was doing this for me, but he was doing this for all the other guys as well. He'd phone you up and think, I was thinking of this, I was thinking of that. Like, he was a leader that sort of tried to lift up and propel those around him. I've come across leaders who kind of insecure and want to stand on the shoulders of the others around them and kind of push them down so they get to an apex. Alec was trying to bring everybody up because he wasn't threatened by anybody. I've come across leaders that have been threatened by people or insecure or uncertain, but Alec was secure and he was certain and he was trying to lift everybody around about him. I do remember a Labour MP from Glenrothes, John McDougall, God rest him, he's dead now. He stopped me one day. I didn't know who he was. He introduced himself and he said, "You're over in Alex Salmond's group," because they were in government and could see us over. I says, "Yeah, I am." He says, "You're very lucky. Pay attention." I thought, he says, "Yeah, people like him are scarce. So you pay attention to him and try and learn what you can." So I walked away from that, wondering. And then we went with the Cod Crusaders to the Treasury shortly after this. And Gordon Brown kept us all waiting. And the Cod Crusaders were there. And Gordon came in almost at a semi-jog. But by this time, we'd all been quite used to the room. And I'd sat on the other side of the table. I was now on Gordon's side of the table. So we all got up and shook Gordon. And Gordon sat beside me. And Alec, of course, was there, and Gordon was doing his talking and wanted to talk about all sorts of things, bar the price of diesel and fishing boats, which was the point of the meeting for the Cod Crusaders. And as Gordon Brown was reading his papers, I leant back, and Gordon leant back. And as Gordon Brown saw me, he leant back further, and then I swung back in my chair, and Gordon couldn't cope with this at all, and Alec was noting afterwards how Gordon just was completely fazed by this. He wasn't giving the Cod Crusaders anything. It was just one of those
Had
chats.
You planned to behave in such a manner?
No, it was just
natural?
just we were waiting for Gordon, and I think a few weeks before, I'll come to this, but a few weeks before there was a little bit of an incident as well. But it occurred to me when I left that meeting that Labour had their person with Tony Blair. See, because of Alex Salmond being a group of 6, I thought 1 in 6 MPs, his leadership material is pretty good. It occurred to me that once Blair goes, Labour don't have the person. It'll go and take them a long time to find the person. In the same way with the Tories, love her or loathe her, and it's loather for me, Margaret Thatcher. The Tories took a long time to find a Thatcher replacement if they ever have, to do their own satisfaction. Perhaps the closest was David Cameron. But I could see that Labour had a problem with Gordon Brown. He didn't have any of the skills of Tony Blair. He couldn't deal with people in the way Tony Blair could. And several weeks before, we're in the Commons, and Alec is trying to make an intervention on Gordon Brown. And Gordon is not in any way taking Alec on, because he knows full well that Alec's about to fire the torpedo that's going to sink the SS Brown under the water. And of course, Gordon Brown didn't really go around demonstrating his brilliance. What Gordon Brown usually had were a pile of acolytes and journalists telling everybody how great Gordon was. But usually on the performance day, Gordon wasn't as great as he was billed. So he wouldn't let him in. He wouldn't give way in the debate. And I kept shouting, "He's scared of you, Alec. Go on, Gordon, let him in." And this threw Gordon completely. And Gordon, I was a new MP who hadn't made my maiden speech, so therefore I couldn't be asked. So I was really in a shield of utter safety. I could create so much trouble for the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and I was encouraged every step of the way by Alec, of course, who was quite enjoying this himself. And Gordon steadfastly refused to let Alec Salmond intervene. And that again told you that this is a guy who the Chancellor of the Exchequer fears, despite what the acolytes and the media say about Gordon Brown. He is scared of Alec Salmond. I thought that day anyway, and that was Alec. He was so capable, and there's so many jokes and laughs and amazing moments from that time.
And was it so different from that time when there was a group of 6 till we became, myself as your colleague of many, a group of 56?
Yeah, I think it was. We're a lot closer to each other, as you would be, because, group dynamics, say if you've got groups of so many size, you've only got so many friend bonds to have. 56 is almost unknowable and unmanageable. And if you're in a room, you know who's missing, whereas 56, you'd be taking forever to work out.
But at that time, of course, when we all went down in a group to reinforce the smaller group that had been there before, Alex very much did what he did to you in the small group of 6. He told us, understand, learn, read, Erskine May, understand the rules and procedures, come up with ideas, be on top of things. He took us around, he took us to the Hansard writers, to make sure that if we missed something from our speeches, it wouldn't be missed. Sometimes he had to explain the meanings and spellings of some words that we'd used. But also it was very encouraging. I mean, I think the point that you made, Angus, was true right till last moments, that Alex always sought to encourage people to be the best they could possibly be, and give everything of himself to ensure that they could do that. And I saw that in the group of 56. The majority of us were not experienced parliamentarians. We didn't really know what we were doing when we got there, but very quickly, thankfully to a lot of help from him, he guided us as to how to make an impact.
Absolutely, and everything you say there is absolutely right. I am smiling because he led me up the garden path of false encouragement one time. And
Just once?
This was an absolute cracker, and I reminded him of it several times, and he clean forgot it. He couldn't remember this happening at all. But we're sitting in the Commons one day, and there's some Labour guy, it's just me and him on the bench, and there's some Labour guy on the other side. He's making a pedestrian to boring speech, and Alec looks at me and he said, "You're quite lucky," he says. I'm thinking, how? He says, "Oh, you're quite lucky." And I know him, this is me 3-4 weeks in Parliament. He says, you've got a very fortunate quality in politics, Angus. And my head's starting to grow a little bit. I'm thinking, oh, well, what's this, Alec? This is praise, He says, yes, and people like you, Angus. Oh, do they? Oh, yeah, they do. So my head's going a bit more, all right, this is whatever you're saying. I've known about you for decades, and if my head's grew, yes, he says, people like you, you're very, very fortunate. My wife likes you, Angus, and she doesn't always take to people quite so quickly, but she likes you. My head's like a hot air balloon. So I get a wee bit more of this about, praise and whatever. And if you can imagine, my head is like a hot air balloon on the roof of the House of Commons. And then an expression came over his face that I got to know very well later. He went, "No, of course, Angus, people like me too, but I've got other qualities as well." So I went from that to my chin flat on the floor in the House of Commons, punctured balloon, and it showed his efficiency with words as well. It showed his brilliance with words, how you could create this edifice and then puncture it instantly. And I remember laughing so much because I was told I was sort of suckered into it. I was reeled in, and the next thing, on the floor I went. And I saw that so often, not in that playful way, but the way Alec used words. He was incredible at using words. And he could say so much with so little. And, you know, I've come across political meetings and maybe even this interview where people taking a lot of words to say things. Alec was succinct and every word was carrying a great burden of meaning.
And I know in Parliament, for the privilege of the time I had to spend in Parliament with Alex, 15 to 17, you talk about, you know, people being afraid of him, but the opponents, opposition, were always very interested in what he had to say, because he always had something meaningful to say. And of course you have a very limited time, unless it's, you know, your debate, your speech, to be effective in your words. But he was able to bring together in a question or an intervention, a short number of words, something that you think, my goodness, where's that come from, and how can it be so how can it be so perceptive and encapsulate what needed to be encapsulated at that moment in time. But not only did he do that for himself, he would also encourage other people who had debates by saying, why don't you ask this question? You know, if you've got a question at PMQ, how about doing it this way? And then he'd tee everything up. And I remember being at the airport once when he was looking at the coverage of what had been happening in the House of Commons, and he was very irritated why we were not getting our reasonable share of coverage. He was making phone calls left, right and centre. And I'm sure you'll agree, Angus says, well, first of all, on the point of respect amongst people in the House of Commons, we can maybe veer into that a bit, because obviously after Alex sadly passed, we heard a lot of tributes made to him. That, and also his work rate was incredible. So what was your sense of how colleagues from all benches thought of
I mean, they
Alex's
listened to him.
contributions?
You know, the House of Commons is a place where somebody who's a communicator cuts through, and Alec cut through with everybody. I mean, I think when John McDougall stopped me that day, he said that he was one of the best 3 or 4 in the House of Commons, around that sort of number, you know, that's out of 650. And he's in a group of 6. And, you know, that's kind of high praise coming from a Scottish Labour MP. He wasn't particularly partisan, I don't think, John McDougall. I didn't know him very well, but, you know, and he also had friends among Scottish Labour as well, you know, like Sir Brian Donoghue. I'm sure Brian wouldn't mind that being said. But he never compromised on his principles at all. Neither did they. You know, some might have become sympathetic to him, but Alec was respected right across the place. He cut through, he was succinct, he was quick on his feet, he was quick with his wits, and he could have a turn of humour and a laugh. He could be like a stand-up comedian if he wanted to go that direction, or he could make one very serious point. And he was a guy who could flash from one side to the other very, very quickly, or use humour to make the serious point, or to think you're going down the serious way and take it to humour. He was really skilled, and it's only when you watch his speeches again you see quite how skilled Alec was.
Of course, Alex was also a master of the media, and I think even now politicians should or could look back and learn an awful lot from his skills.
Yeah, I mean, I think he used to tell us that in his early days down in Westminster, when he used to, I think there's a group of 3 of them or something, he said we had to do our best to run around and look like a crowd. I think when I was elected in 1996, he says, this is great. He said, we need more than 2 taxis. We need more than 1 taxi to transport ourselves around. Sometimes lifts wouldn't let us all in, he said about the SNP group. But he used to go up, I think it was to Paddington Station, to get the early editions of newspapers to see how he could throw in a line and be relevant in the next thing and make Scotland and the SNP relevant. Because he was, despite not having a Scottish Parliament at the time, or a Scottish government, he was in a voice that was really authentically, he had no hostage to fortune in any other party. He was speaking from the hip for Scotland, and he made sure he did that. He took that responsibility very seriously. He understood how the media worked. He was succinct when he was dealing with the media. He had a knowledge of journalists and the pressures on journalists, but that goes back to the way he saw strategy. He knew that editors, journalists, and the interplay between all these guys, and they weren't just a single edifice together, but that there was problems and chinks in amongst them, and that you could get to know a journalist, and you could get so far with certain journalists, even despite the editor. He was very clever like that. You know, where some people would have gone, oh, well, that's such and such, we don't talk to them, and just dismissed them. Alec always looked for opportunities, and he used those opportunities for his advantage, SNP's advantage, and Scotland's advantage.
In Parliament, I remember he used to talk often looking at people who to this day have an inability to memorise the question that's so important in terms of the constituents that they're representing.
Yeah.
And he often talked about how standards had fallen incredibly from previously when people could just stand up and make a speech, to one where now people seem to be consumed, even in the Scottish Parliament, with looking down and not looking up.
Yeah, I think, you know, I was reading in the something historical about Celtic monks. I mean, this is centuries ago, who could store things in their memories and recite orally. And those who gathered Highland folk tales from illiterate peoples could go along to see these people 5 nights on the trot, and the same story would be being told. So I think there's a part in people's brains where if they want to store it orally, they can store it orally. If they start using writing, the oral storage goes a little bit. And the two don't seem to work very well. I think there's a few that probably would aid memoirs, but Alec was onto something there. There's almost a cultural shift, as there was a cultural shift over the centuries from memory and spoken to written and reading. And yeah, he was deaf. But again, he was fantastic at spotting those kind of social trends as well. He didn't just spot them in Parliament, he spotted them round and about, and he spotted, this is all part of, there's another strand to the way he saw the strategies of the world and the way things interplayed with each other. He was really good at spotting those things. You know, he could have walked into any number of professions in life, but you know, he probably could have walked into something where he was in market research or sociology or something. He really got an awful lot of things that other people didn't quite see. And of course, when he said it, it was often very obvious, but Alec was often the first to spot things.
So after 19 years for you as an SNP MP, you joined ALBA. And after the break, we'll discuss why. See you then.
Water is life, but not all water is equal. Our water ionizer restructures and alkalizes water for optimum hydration and detoxification, recreating the planet's ultimate water sources, found in lightning-struck lakes and newly melted icebergs. H2 Pure Source. Change your water. Change your life.
Welcome back. I'm delighted to be joined by Angus Brendan MacNeil, the former MP for Nahealing and Year. And I should say, Alex made sure I learnt how to say that properly. And he did say to me on many occasions, he'd often phone you up and ask him about pronunciation.
He did.
But he was intent on getting the constituency pronunciation
He was
correct.
interested in Scottish history. He was also interested in Scotland's languages as well. And he was very interested in Gaelic. And I think if he could have had a Gaelic transfusion to speak Gaelic, he would have. Because the amount of times he raised Gaelic, mentioned Gaelic, he saw Gaelic as very much part of Scotland's tapestry, if you like, and he was personally interested in that, and got to say that what came after him wasn't as interested in that facet of Scotland's culture and history.
Now you, Angus, had been in discussions with Alex for a period of time about joining ALBA. Tell us a bit about your journey from SNP to ALBA. Why?
Well, I think probably, from 2000s onward, from 2020 onwards, really, if not before. I mean, if we could play right back to the Brexit referendum, and we're all meeting, you were there, we're all meeting to discuss the upcoming Brexit referendum, and he was planning about what's coming up and what we have to do, and I said, Alec, there's no way they're going to vote for Brexit. I mean, it's not going to happen. He says, by the time people get to vote, they'll be voting about someone else. They'll probably be voting about David Cameron. It's 10 months away. Again, he's spotting the way people move, he's understanding. He says, well, our job is, regardless of what happens, he says, our job is to make sure Scotland votes to remain in the European Union. That's our job. We will do that. And we won't play the negative game they're playing. We'll play a different game. And I remember saying to him at the time, because, there were a few times I used to poke the bear, if you like, because you got as much from him in arguing and falling out with him with a small, it's not capital letters, but small letters. And I'm like, what are you going to do if there's no Brexit? Where's this going to leave independence? We can't leave our eggs in the Brexit basket. We'll think about that. There's nothing. We need in Scotland to vote against Brexit, and they need to vote for Brexit for independence to come live again amongst the people. And, that was kind of left hanging there. And he wasn't threatened by argument, but he could see there was an issue there. He just got on with the job in hand. But I think when the real problem started to emerge were after the Brexit vote, nothing happened on the Scottish independence front. Nicola Sturgeon came down one time, and I remember asking her, what's your plan for a Brexit? I think probably early 2018, as opposed to Brexit about 20 months later at New Year 2020, going into 2019 going into 2020. And she said, well, we're very surprised if there's a Brexit in 5 months' time. This was in the November time, 2018. And I thought, she's put all her eggs in the one basket. I'm a bit uncomfortable with this. What if Brexit comes? What are we going to do? It was only about 5 months before actual Brexit, it dawned on me at the end of 2019, probably July, August 2019, that Nicola Sturgeon had no plan for that Brexit either. She had no plan for either Brexit. And as a result of that, as a result of the opportunities being missed since 2016, and there were some SNP people thought we shouldn't do anything about independence, so they needed to deal with Brexit first, which I thought was bizarre. Brexit was given the opportunity, the cause for getting out, because we were promised to be in the European Union in 2014. Nothing was happening at all. I was starting to get discontented with that. I mean, I tried to point out that we might not be able to have a referendum. We needed to have a backup plan. Nothing was coming from Brexit. And Ali could see that I was clearly concerned that there was going to be no Scottish independence opportunity around those years. And we're in 2025 and there hasn't been. So when he was coming up to the 2020 election, I mean, he was a friend as well as a mentor, if you like, and somebody I frequently gave advice to. He told me one time that a few other people feel the need to phone their leader and First Minister with advice, Angus, but you do. I'm not sure I need any of it, but anyway, Alec was a tremendous source for anybody who wanted it, and he knew I was frustrated. And I think by the time he set up ALBA, he was kind of asking me if I would join, and I felt, because of the activists who got me elected in the SNP only in 2019, that I really couldn't walk. And probably in hindsight, I maybe should have walked. It's just always difficult to make calls because things might have played out differently. You might have been more people joining or moving together because, thinking sentinel people could see that nothing was happening with the SNP before 2021 for independence. I remember telling an activist after 2021, she told me, this is going great. Things will be happening in the next few months. I says, they won't be. I said, nothing will happen. Nothing will happen by midsummer, nothing will happen by the September equinox, and nothing will happen by midwinter.
Despite the fact that the majority was there to make it happen. Yeah, and of course, the strategy of ALBA and the forming of ALBA was primarily, specifically, to achieve a supermajority and move independence in the direction that it had to go and deliver it.
If you count the list votes of Andy Whiteman, the Greens, ALBA and the SNP, there was a majority for independence. And I wrote before the 2021 election that the 2026 election, because people were bound to realise, but then we have to use the elections because there's going to be no referendum, that was going to be the 2026 election for slow learners. I'm just amazed at how optimistic I was in 2020-21, that people are still seeing that they can't use an election for independence. Some people say they're pro-independence, but they're not fully pro-independence because they're saying not if it's an election, they don't want it.
Indeed, there are independence majorities and there are independence majorities. There are independence majorities in the coalition, obviously between the SNP and Greens, ostensibly, which was about being pro-Scottish independence, only for nothing to happen. And now there's a potential for an independence majority that will involve ALBA, looking at current polling, which will mean independence will be absolutely front and centre of the agenda and will be delivered.
Yeah, I'm also surprised at some activists or some people who say, you know, in politics the SNP have been ALBA have been pointing out some of the shortcomings of the SNP, and you shouldn't do that. You should stay united and together. No, you know, it's healthy to have debate. It's healthy to be able to point things out to people, and if they're not moving in the direction of independence, that should be clearly pointed out. I mean, had ALBA been in there just now, rather than the SNP kowtowing and working together with the Liberal Democrats to drop mentions of independence, we might have them all working together to make sure we had an election based on independence, with independence being the question. Because we now have a situation where in the 80s Scotland was powerless. Now we are losing Grangemouth. We're not as powerless as we were in the 80s. We have got a parliament that's got a potential mechanism to go to the people. We couldn't do any of this in the 80s. We couldn't tweak Thatcher's nose in any way, and we couldn't move to independence when people might have or might not have. Now people will move to independence. We've got the mechanism there. We've just got a group of people at the head of the SNP who refuse to use the mechanism to release independence. It's frustrating beyond belief, and I know Alec was absolutely and utterly frustrated by the carry-on and the wasted opportunities.
Well, I mean, indeed, we don't.
The SNP and the Scottish Parliament from 2016 onwards.
We don't even need to speak to that, because, of course, there are interviews upon interviews upon interviews where Alex continued to give advice and say, this is what we should be doing, why don't we do this, and time just passed by. Now, though, moving forward, and to honour his legacy, and, of course, the dream shall never die on delivering Scottish independence, do you think, Angus, with the right formula and with the right cooperation, we can take independence across the line and save Scotland?
Yeah, but you know, the ancient Greeks, when democracy was coming, the way it relied on a public that was switched on and educated and not misled by demagogues or slogans. We also need an independence voting public to realise that if you vote second vote SNP, which failed in 2021, which failed in 2016, and succeeded but inefficiently in 2011, that if they keep doing that, they're going to be handing seats to Labour, Tories and Reform, that they've got to use their votes for independence and make sure that they don't waste their second vote, because the way the polls are looking, SNP second votes are going to be wasted. So make sure you take those votes and you put them into an independence pot as well. That wasn't available in 2011 when Alec just managed, albeit inefficiently, to get his majority, because loads of those votes were wasted too on the list. More wasted in 2016, more wasted in 2021. But this time, we rely on the people. We need to give them the leadership. We have to tell them, but they've got to themselves not sit back and say, oh, well, we'll wait and see how it goes again. Because we saw how it went in 2021. There's nothing the SNP can do after this 2026 election that they can't do now for independence. There ain't going to be a referendum. We've just got to really understand that point. There's not going to be a referendum. The only mechanism available to us in the ballot box is at an election. Whether we call an extraordinary election an independence or use a bus timetable, if you like, by Westminster 2026 election, which is in the Scotland Act, we use that one for independence. The elections have to be used, and the public, if they want independence, have to be sharper than the leadership that's not there at the moment. Because the SNP leadership, they go independence, they go SNP first, second. Now, SNP first, second is not putting independence first. It's relegating independence to party position and advantage. And if we're in this, and we should all be in this for independence, but unfortunately, it's quite clear to me, and it was clear to me when I was in the SNP, and I did my best to hint in 2021 that the SNP 1-2 was inefficient for independence, that if this continues as we are, you can mark my words that we'll be sitting here before the 2031 election with no further advancement than we were before the 2021 election. And that'd be a decade lost. Tragic.
But the parties have to be clear about what voting for them actually means in terms of independence. I mean, in 2011, Alex did secure the majority, beat the system, and delivered what he promised he would, which is an independence referendum in 2014. People have continued to vote for parties who've told them they're going to do something similar or along those lines only to be disappointed. What do you think the messaging has to be this time round to ensure that 2026 is the independence election before people lose hope and it all seems too late?
I mean, just as you're speaking there, I haven't actually done the numbers on this, but it'd be interesting to simulate the numbers of the 2021 election on those list votes, not being SNP list votes, but being ALBA list votes, and seeing how that would affected pro-independence MSPs in the Parliament versus Libertarian, Liberal, no reform. And I've got a feeling that you would see in each of those elections, if it had been SNP 1, ALBA 2, you'd have seen the almost obliteration of those unionist parties. And if the independence voters are aware of that, then they can do so efficiently. And that's maybe a piece of work that we're going to have to do going forward, because we have an opportunity now. We've still got the opportunity. We've only got people to understand. We've got people probably in SNP branches to make the leadership listen. I mean, I think ministers in Holyrood really have to look, do they want to be administrating in the Westminster devolved Parliament in Scotland, which is what all Holyrood is, you know, or do they want to raise their eyes to somewhere else? Do they want to be Stormont or do they want to be Dublin? Do they want to be Holyrood or do they want to be Reykjavik or Oslo or Copenhagen? And any steps they take at Holyrood can be absolutely wrecked as any council's steps for within their council area by a higher level of government. And we see this all the time in Scotland, you know. You do whatever for such and such poverty, and the next thing, couples over 80 lose £600 over the winter because the winter fuel payment's gone. So you want to keep living in that place, you want to keep boasting that something, child poverty is best in the UK and Scotland, or do you want to say, no, we've halved it and it's now near Nordic levels? You know, we've got to get out of the UK mindset, and the SNP unfortunately is in the UK mindset.
Well, it does come down to the passion and determination to deliver on what the promise was. Top line of manifestos, independence for Scotland. Top line of constitutions was that. But it takes more than words, it takes action. And of course, ALBA is a party of action. It's a party of activists. You'll be attending, Angus, your first conference next month.
Yes.
In Edinburgh. And we look forward to hearing from you as an ALBA member. And of course, ALBA party members will discuss and decide the strategy for the 2026 election. I'm sure you're very much looking forward to being amongst like-minded people, like-minded insofar as they want independence as quickly as you do.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what's going to happen in the next number of years with Scotland's population and with what is reckoned to happen with the demographics, I mean, I remember having meetings with the Home Office to try and help the Hebrides and change policies, and the one-size-fits-all wasn't working, but they were disinterested. I mean, Scotland has an opportunity to catch economically and prosperity and for hopes for people and getting people out of poverty and get people healthier and get people wealthier and get people better educated. And so many plus things could happen, but you really need political powers, and you need to get out of a place that has decided that they will forgo 5% of GDP. Now, what does that mean? Well, 5% of GDP is 44 billion in taxes. What does that mean? Well, if you don't have 44 billion in taxes, that means you're going to have to take £600 off pensioners. That means you're going to have to charge students for going to college. That means all sorts of extra things that are a burden on society because they're ideologically stuck with Brexit, a very costly way of governing, and they're casting around for growth ideas and what have you. When the biggest growth idea, and if you mention this to Keir Starmer, and manufacturers groups have told me that they've told him if you want to add 5% to GDP, and he goes, how? End Brexit. And he goes, oh, don't, and he hits the roof apparently. Yeah, but the reality is that you've got to do that. Now, if they want to stick with the economic carry, let them, but let's get Scotland out of this. And we've got an opportunity to do that. We've got the mechanism, and the SNP are the ones at the moment with their fingers on the trigger of that mechanism, and they refuse to deploy it. Why? I just don't understand. We could have a vote in independence any month now. And going back to what Nicola Sturgeon said in 19th of October, 2023, we were going to have a referendum. Mark my words, or whatever she said. You could have held an election that day. But, I was in the meetings where she misled MPs and told them that, no, the only way you can cause an election is by her resigning, which risked Douglas Ross being First Minister. Now, we saw when Hamza resigned, and when she resigned, that didn't happen. But I said, let's get a legal opinion so we know the actual facts. And she sort of barked that she didn't need, or screeched, I think it was, she didn't need a legal opinion for a political position. Opportunity lost, and everybody sort of shrank and stayed quiet because Nicola was quite quite a terrier and terrified some people.
Let's just say they've had a fair crack at the whip, Angus. We offered an opportunity in 2021. There's an opportunity in 2026 to deliver.
Can I just say on that opportunity? Yeah. You know, I come across quite a number of independent activists. I think politics is a sort of a kumbaya, all sit together moment. I mean, I go to Iceland, I go to Ireland, I see political parties there that all agree on independence and nothing else after that. Now, a mature Scotland will have a situation when we do, if we do, because there's not actually a guarantee to independence, it's up to us to get a move on. If we become independent, we'll have political parties believing in independence and not agreeing with each other day by day. ALBA and the SNP and the Greens and whoever else don't need to sit around with guitars, all agree nicely with each other. We've only got to agree with the top line. A vote for us is a vote for independence. And then under that, you're voting for different policies. And that's the way mature democracies behave. It's not like, I don't know if you've seen the film The Death of Stalin, where the Molotov character is recklessly looking for agreement and unanimity all the time. You know, that sort of stuff gets people nowhere. You need a plurality of voices. You've got to be able to discuss and debate. And when the SNP, as they are at the moment, aren't taking Scotland forward and aren't interested in independence, but are more interested in moaning daily about Westminster than getting us out of Westminster, then you've got to point that out. But we're still hoping they're on the independent scale, though they've no actual plans to do anything for it or with it or to achieve it, and maybe just be devolutionists. But we have to pull them along and to come with others and be under that one banner of independence and let the people vote on that basis. But we have to be intelligent about this.
If that's what any political party wants, who wants independence, that's surely what they should do. They should mean it and they should deliver it and not pretend that's what they mean to achieve votes, which is why so many people are so scunnered, to use a good Scottish word, where we are just now with voter apathy being the winner.
Well, the scunnered because we're going nowhere.
Yeah, and we're running out of time, running out of road and running out of patience. However, we can look forward to a good, strong intervention from ALBA in the 2026 elections.
Absolutely.
I look forward to working with you as part of that team to deliver on the dream, which we promised would never die, that we must deliver for Alex and for the people of Scotland. And as Wings Over Scotland Rev Stu Campbell often says or writes, you know, it's really not about the policies after independence, it's about getting us to independence, and then there's room for all sorts of voices with all sorts of ideas. So ALBA have plenty of ideas.
The dream shall never die until it's overtaken by reality.
This is true. Angus Brendan MacNeil, thank you so much for joining me on Scotland Speaks.
Thank you.
And with that, sadly, we come to the end of this week's show. But we do hope you've enjoyed listening to Angus Brendan MacNeil as much as we've enjoyed interviewing him. And we in the ALBA party very much look forward to Angus playing a fulsome part in the party from now on, and indeed up to those all-important elections of 2026. But from now, from all of us here at the show, can we thank you again for all of your messages. Please do keep sending them in. They mean an awful lot to all of us. But until next week, take good care of yourselves, and we shall see you then. Bye.